We never feel pressure.
No pressure. Cool, man.
You're
cool.
in
That's why it's Cube
We're
Consultancy.
cool. We're cool.
You're in.
So it's Mark and Richard here from Cube Consultancy, and today we're going to be talking about leaving the UK, I guess.
And whatever questions
Diaz is going to fire our way.
the number one is going to ask.
What are the top 3 most desirable countries that have significantly better tax benefits than the UK?
We kind of had a sneak preview on this one, and I answered incorrectly and said, of course, there are at least 13 countries that you could argue from a tax perspective are more desirable because they don't actually recognise the concept of income tax, which is quite a helpful hand into your pocket. But which ones have we seen?
Most popular ones are definitely
Dubai is definitely number one.
Dubai
to date.
Portugal as well. There's a new tax scheme over in Portugal. It was previously 10-year tax-free. You've probably seen loads of people move over there back in the day. They stopped that because the house prices were going too high for locals. So that stopped. But a new scheme's come out now, which has gone live. I think it was this year. Again, it's a 10-year tax break for income tax.
It's basically a golden visa style arrangement. If you buy a house and come here, you don't have to pay any tax for a period, right?
That's it.
That's more or less it. That's on an income tax perspective.
But Dubai is definitely the most popular. Abu Dhabi around there. There is corporation tax now in Dubai, but no income tax. So you could have a UK company potentially where you receive a dividend over in Dubai and it'll be all tax free.
Yeah, and don't forget Dubai is but one of the 7 Emirates which form the UAE. Obviously Abu Dhabi is a sort of administrative capital state, but there's another 5 that you can look into, but they are of varying degrees of sophistication. People tend to like Dubai because it's relatively westernized. You know, you've probably seen the videos. There's a pretty decent lifestyle out there, plenty of accommodation, whereas some of the other Emirates are a little bit more rustic, shall we say.
You've got ones closer to home, like Jersey and Guernsey and Gibraltar as well. So it all depends what you're going for, really. Yeah,
Cyprus went through a phase of popularity down the other end of the Mediterranean, but a few years back they had a few issues with banks and they were closing people's accounts, so people have been a little bit nervous about going back to Cyprus. And then of course we've got 1 or 2 folk who've gone a bit the other way, gone west, gone out to the sort of Central America and the Caribbean in particular. St Kitts and Nevis.
Yeah, around that region. It all depends on your movements, but yeah, I would say UAE is the most popular.
If you're moving to America and doing your own tax, does PAYE exist for all?
You've left the country. If you elect to leave this country and you tell HMRC that you're leaving on this date, you get a little bit of a kickstart because HMRC will give you a full year's tax allowance in the year you leave, in inverted commas, but do you have to have no intent to return or foreseeable future?
Foreseeable future. Well, you disengage from being a UK tax resident. They have the equivalent of PAYE over in the US. In the US, everyone does a self-assessment, the equivalent of a self-assessment. So
and it's done in January.
It's done in January, and it's a bit different. So you'll include things like medical care. Like you'll see it that everyone needs to do it. It's very different. It must be a dream for accountants.
Yeah, that's probably why there's 10 times the number of accountants per 1,000 head of population in America than there are in the UK. There's obviously 2 types of income tax as well in the United States. You have the federal tax, which is levied across all 50 states. And then you have the individual resident states where you live in, which has their own rates of income tax. And some of those states, like Texas, like Wyoming, I think, like Florida City, Florida, actually have a 0 rate of income tax.
Arizona,
at a state level. But you're still captured by, big corporate government.
But California is like a monster tax.
By comparison, you'll see a lot of the tech bros from, San Francisco down to LA are now moving, because whilst California was where they all started, their income tax rates have been increasing and increasing and increasing. And of course, as more people leave California, they have less money that they're collecting, so they have to increase them some more. Maybe there's a lesson there for Sakir. I don't know.
Why is everyone really moving to Dubai?
Tax is a big appeal, and Probably crime, I would say, are the two factors that I've been dealing with when I speak to clients. It's a better, different lifestyle
Feels
over there.
safer, maybe.
You definitely feel safer. I mean, I was there last week. It definitely is suited for families. It's a lot safer. The amount of English people there now is, mad. I was there at some dinner party thing with the kids, and most of the children there were residents when they were asked. So, yeah, I mean, between tax and also that's probably the main reasons. I mean, I don't know what you've been experiencing.
Well, it's I think you said something interesting the other day about it has a sensation and appears to be a little bit like Marbella was, maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Like a lot of English people in Dubai, a lot of tax
Yeah.
residents. There's obviously people who are there for several different reasons. Some people might actually have just been seconded or posted to work for a bank, a financial institution. But some people may have already made their money, like like influencers, social media, celebrities, and by physically relocating to Dubai,
Yeah.
any income they may have generated over 2 or 3 years in the UK, provided they stay away long enough, then becomes tax free. That's more or less it.
Well, you think about if you have a UK company, you've been building it up, there's massive retained earnings, 2-3 mil, let's say. You go over to Dubai and declare yourself a dividend and take all of that out tax free. It's the difference between retirement and not. In essence, that's really it for me. People are looking at it going, I've got to be out of the UK for a year, 2 years for income tax, more for capital gains if you're going to sell your company. But to have that option of not losing half of it, it's pretty appealing.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, marginal rates of tax now in the UK, income tax, are well in excess of 55, heading towards 60% now. It almost harks back to, the mid 70s where you had 87% marginal rate on unearned income. Now, why would you want to do it? You wouldn't if you can just go away for 2 years and pay zero.
Well, the fact is, well, a lot of people work from their laptops, so they can work anywhere. It's different for us. We got an office. People come to the office. We go into London, wherever around the country to see clients. But loads of people just work from their laptop and say they're working from home. So why not work from Dubai?
How does the average salary earnings in these non-tax countries compare to the UK, and is it really worth moving?
In terms of taking a job over there?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know what jobs they're offering, really. I'd imagine Saudi definitely has increased salaries. We know that firsthand.
Yeah, we were out in Saudi, a month, 2 months ago,
Yeah.
and we probably met representatives of most countries in the Commonwealth. We met New Zealanders, we met Australians, we met Brits, didn't we?
But we met a client that we know that's on 10 times.
Yeah, he was an example. He comes from East Hertfordshire. He would be getting 40 to 50,000 a year in the UK, and a 3-year contract in Saudi, tax free, 500,000 for the same job.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, it's a technical job. It involves a relatively skilled scientific skill, but why not get paid 10 times if you can? I mean, I get it. I mean, the only thing about that was it isn't the best environment, to live week to week, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of people moving to Dubai, I don't know anyone that's moved over there for a job. Most of the people we've got that have gone over there have either set up the businesses, have an established business here in the UK, or just trade from a laptop. So I don't know salary-wise how that would compare.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that if cost of living is higher, incomes are generally higher. However, we found that in Saudi they had a slightly different policy where it was like Saudi nationals command a different minimum wage to Saudi non-nationals. So I think it's going to be very much country by country.
A lot of the people that have moved over there, though, seem to have, because they don't really like driving in Dubai, seem to have drivers, and they're full-time drivers on about £500 or £600 equivalent a month, which obviously is quite cheap, but costs of food and everything else is definitely more expensive.
Yeah, I mean, there's almost like two economies in, certainly in Riyadh when we're in. No, it was, people out on the street. We went to McDonald's, for example, and that seemed eminently reasonable. and then you stay in the hotel, and it's eminently over the top charging.
Yeah,
So
massively
very
expensive.
much 2 tier, and that's the largest single city. Now, when you get outside of it, it became very basic, didn't it?
Yeah.
But that's very specific, really, Saudi. But going back to Dubai, very Western, very sort of Western facing, very relatively relaxed. Although we've heard one or two sort of recent stories in the newspapers about some things that can occur, but I think it's the exception, not the norm. I mean, America, generally speaking, you for the same job, you're getting about twice what you get normally in the UK as a general rule. And also you can, because of the tax system Mark spoke about, you get an allowance for each child, for example. If you have 3 children, you get 3 deductions. If you have, obviously medical is expensive out there, but you get it fully deductible against your income. So whilst it sounds like everything's more expensive, it's a tax deduction. So you've always got to think in, post-tax money in your pocket. And I don't know many people who've gone to the US and ended up poorer.
Yeah, true.
Can you have a UK accountant like Cubed when living abroad?
Of course you can.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. We have 1,200 clients, probably about a third of those are income tax clients, and probably several dozen or more who are non-UK resident, would you say? Got to be 30 plus.
Yeah, it would be.
Yeah.
I mean, how we seem normally to help is where they've got a Dubai company, we'll undertake all of the accounting, bookkeeping, just as we do for their UK company, and then we'll use a partner we've got in Dubai to make any relevant filings. But that's done based on our numbers. Income tax, obviously, they don't need to, and a lot of them seem to have UK properties. So if they've got UK properties, they're always going to be overseas landlords. So we have to do a self-assessment for that element, and they'll pay tax on that, which they hate, obviously, because they're paying UK tax on a property. But that's how it goes.
And until properties are movable, it's always going to be the case.
Yeah.
How can you start a business in a country where you need a visa?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to people coming over to us to form their limited companies. We work with formation agents, the equivalent. It gets complicated in Dubai because there's so many different licenses. You can get a celeb license, you can get a professional qualification license. It depends what box you tick as to what license you get, and then you've got the different zones.
Yeah, because we thought there was a couple of handfuls of zones, but it's nearer 50 or 60 different zones that you pick, and these are what we're talking about is a free zone, where effectively they make up their own tax rules.
Yeah.
So you can be in one tax zone and pay 9% corporation tax, and you can be in a free zone next door and be paying 0% of corporate tax.
Some free zones are more stable than others, and some free zones are more suited to the sector you're in.
Yeah.
So if it's an accountancy business versus construction.
Yeah, and somebody pointed out just this week that some free zones are not actually government backed, because you associate free zones in this country with being supported or financed or in some way supported by the government. Out there, the majority of free zones are government backed, but there are a number that are set up by third party companies and corporates. So realistically, you're putting your trust in a non-government backed setup, which is a little bit risky. So we tend to sort of suggest that a more stable, associated with the government zone is probably safest at the moment.
The most difficult thing about Dubai is probably the banking. Setting up bank accounts can be time consuming, and making them work. They're very paper based, which obviously is just, it's literally a full day to do transfers. That's probably the most difficult thing you'll face, where you don't have that in other regions. Portugal's fairly good, Cyprus as well, and then obviously the Channel Islands are fine. But Dubai, definitely, they're a little bit dated in their banking systems.
Yeah, and unless we forget, the United Arab Emirates has only really been going for just over 50 years. So, this is an emerging country which has fast-tracked itself into Western consciousness and and our ways of operating. So everything takes a little time to play catch up. I mean, there obviously are some of those banks out there which are now part owned or controlled by more familiar banking groups. Like there's one or two local banks who are associated with HSBC, for example. But if you think you're going to go out there and have an app like a Revolut or a Monzo or even a Barclays, not yet. So the banking is very challenging, and the setup of the bank accounts is more than challenging.
It's saying that, I mean, it's becoming as difficult over here in the UK now for banks. Obviously, you've got the Revoluts, the Neo banks, the Starlings and whatnot, but a high street bank, first if you can find them these days.
yeah.
And then
I mean, it's a bit of a
trying to set it up. I mean,
contradiction in terms, high street, because they're not in the high street anymore.
But we're always saying allow 3 weeks for a UK bank. With all the checks and KYC.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Like if it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks to set up a bank account in Dubai, we've seen worse with NatWest in Hertfordshire. Yeah. So who are we to complain, really? It's just a slightly different cultural adaptation of what we're familiar with, really.
Yeah, I mean, in Dubai you have to move over, you have to do your health checks and biometrics and all that kind of stuff, which obviously Barclays Bank don't normally ask for. But things like that is where it's dated. But the UK is it's slowing down considering we've got all the technology.
Yeah, but if you think about it, biometrics and medical testing when they're issuing out residency visas, it's kind of sensible.
It is, yeah.
And in a lot of ways, Dubai is ahead of the curve in that. Here, Companies House, for example, and company formation agents in the UK have only recently moved to actually trying to KYC you properly via video camera or actually prove who you are. A year ago, you literally set up the company and you're on. Now, that's obviously has created a lot of failure and a lot of fraud and a lot of irregularity, which now they're actually only really getting on top of. So maybe some of these other countries are a little bit ahead on that.
Yeah.
What are the tax and financial quirks in Saudi Arabia that some foreigners moving there for work should be aware of?
Quirks? Well, having no income tax isn't really a quirk, is it? That's a bit of a plus.
Yeah, it's a big old plus. I mean, the main thing in the year they move is that split year treatment. So obviously part of their year, depending when they move in the tax year, will be liable to UK tax, and then the rest will be Saudi, so no tax. They're also not entitled to have ISAs or any tax benefits here in the UK while they're not a UK tax resident. And then a lot of other people, when they move back to the UK, are concerned moving their money from the Saudi account over will then be taxed again. However, they need to understand that you are a tax resident in that year when you earn that money. So HMRC or the UK don't really care about it. Now, rebuilding your credit score in the UK by being off the radar for however many years you're away is definitely something to consider if you're going to come back and buy a house, which a lot of people do. But there is becoming more and more mortgage providers that are specialising in expats returning to the UK.
Yeah. And, if you refer back to what Mark just said there, and in my favourite book of the year last year, Taxtopia, I'm not saying anyone does this necessarily, but if you were to leave the UK on the 10th of April, between the 6th of April and the 10th of April, you can earn £12,500 without paying any tax at all. So that would certainly be a quirk.
Little gem.
Little takeaway for everyone.
Throw that in for free. But I would recommend Taxtopia if you want to learn a little bit about tax and some of the options out there, and also have a bit of a laugh at the same time.
What does and doesn't count as an expense when spending on a business trip?
On the grounds that it's different if it's a company, if it's expenditure going through a company, than if it's an expenditure going through an individual's tax return, because it's a more onerous legal rule set for personal tax, where it is wholly, exclusively, and necessarily for the carrying out of your business or trade. So it's a very tight test there. When it's a company, it's a little bit more fluid, because obviously a lot of business now global, international. So you can always argue that a percentage of what you're doing could be in relation to furthering your trade, furthering your business, meeting overseas suppliers, lowering costs, introducing new customer groupings, setting up new products and services. But
Yeah.
I think the best thing to do is probably give Cubed a call, and we can give some individual advice.
You want to evidence that as much as possible, be it emails from customers, whoever you're going to meet. If you can, if you're doing a presentation, film it. That always helps. The key bit is just the evidence. And if you can evidence that you're over there for a specific reason for a meeting, then the majority of them costs for that trip will be allowable.
Because obviously, the biggest cost on most trips is the airfare, and the hotel, both of which would be a fairly reasonable deduction against corporate tax for sure.
Yeah.
What are the implications when doing business with foreign businesses?
Well, biggest risk is that you don't get paid.
Yeah, and obviously,
the biggest one.
Yeah, if you're actually trading with overseas countries, corporates, you can actually take advantage of some of the government's export guarantee schemes. So if you've got a large contract and you're worried about getting paid, you can enter into arrangements with the UK government, who will effectively underwrite your credit risk. But it's still a risk, but ultimately the government will help develop trade overseas if it's significant. It has to be above a certain size, obviously.
Yeah, I think it's building up them terms and the relationship, but obviously the biggest risk is that. And then the other risk is the VAT implications. Be it either way, to their country or to the UK. Certain things are allowable. The treatment of it goes as far as delivering a service through your phone. So a fitness person is delivering a service into someone in the US. How do you deem where that person is taxable? It goes down to that kind of detail.
Yeah,
so
and if you're talking about sales tax, i.e. in this country value-added tax, but in most other countries normally known as sales tax, there are so many combinations. I mean, we looked at for one client who was selling into America, and there was over 4,000 different physical situations which would attract a different rate of tax. And obviously when you trade around, say, European countries and you trade around the Middle East, each local regime, jurisdiction or country will have its own minimum amount above which you need to register for sales tax in that country. I think Australia is quite low, isn't it?
Really, that's like $25,000.
Yeah, so if you're making sales into Australia of 25,000 Australian dollars, you have to register.
But the America was a really good example, because we had a client that was selling mass amounts of clothes into the US. Each state has got its own kind of tax regime. So it was either the number of items, the type of items, like it wasn't children's clothes, it was dresses, and then number of transactions. There was lots of factors, and depending on that was the rate of tax you paid. America's so strange that it even goes down to how close you are to churches. There's a different rate. Do you remember that?
Yeah, there was a different rate of tax that applied within the parish. I use that word in the English sense, but within the catchment area of a particular church. If you're inside that, you paid no tax. If you're outside that, you paid more tax. So I'll say that's what stuck in my mind. There was over 4,000 potential outcomes in what apparently is just 50 states of America.
But I mean, then we've got other clients that.
What was the gun one? There was something about a gun.
Yeah, there's another tax for that. But in the UK, we've got other clients that arrange facilities or things around the world, and they might have the customer is going to, and then another company that they've got outside, and you've got a thing called triangulation. And provided it doesn't come to the UK, then there's no UK VAT. So that there is so many elements on that. But we are world experts, so come speak to us.
Certainly the best sales tax specialist in Hertfordshire.
This is a bonus question.
Oh, what do we get? What's the bonus?
Nice.
What could Keir Starmer and the Labour government do to keep businesses in England?
Oh, do not start me on Sir Keir Starmer. I mean, I touched on it earlier. Since July, when he got voted into power, 203,000 businesses have closed. I just think about that. 203,000 businesses, which employ on average 8 to 9 people. So you can do the maths, right? That's the best. That's nearly 2 million people who have got to look for employment elsewhere, or maybe even go abroad. Now, what could they do? I mean, I'm a bit of a small state, low tax sort of person. I don't know what about.
Yeah, no, similar. I mean, the budget's obviously coming out soon again. You're thinking it's going to be an increase in corporation tax, of which UK with 19% previously was pretty appealing, alongside the banking and everything else that comes with a UK company. But you go over that 25 and more, and all of a sudden you're not as appealing. But the country's struggling. So
yeah, the trouble with politicians, as we all know, is they tend to tell fibs. My wife was actually talking about this last night. She goes, "How come when Sir Keir stated 87 times on TV in the last election campaign that there would be no increase in council tax, has every council around the country levied a 4.9% increase to every household on average?" I have no idea. I mean, they came into power advocating growth. As we know, growth projection was halved this week from 2% per annum to 1%. They came into power, if you grow the economy fast enough, tax revenues go up, you can spend more on public services. Unfortunately, one of those things didn't happen, which was the economy hasn't grown. So we are now left with more spending, which they've committed to, and therefore they've got this. They thought the 22 billion black hole was big. Since coming to power, they've made commitments over the next 5 years in excess of 60 billion. So they didn't like 22 billion. They got to hate 80 billion. Now, what they could do would be a little bit bolder, but then that would be a little bit too Thatcher-esque for them, I suspect, which is to lower some of the headline rates of tax. What I would always advocate is lower the rate at which, raise the rate at which you start paying income tax. Lower the effective rate of corporation tax. They are going to increase the digital services tax, which they will quite say only affects 20 of the largest corporates operating globally, which may or may not be true. But even so, if you increase that, the likelihood of increased employment from Facebook or Amazon or Netflix is going to go down. It's not going to go up, in my opinion. What could they do? What they could do is to, I believe, bring in a tiered system of corporation tax so that any company up until 50,000 pays no corporation tax. Because don't forget, you may pay no corporation tax, but you're collecting for free PAYE and national insurance. You're probably, if you're turning over more than £90,000, chucking VAT into the coffers as well. You know, if you make a profit at the end of all of that, I think you should get a break. So let's say 50,000 or 100,000, no corporation tax. Let's then say, like we do with income tax, up to £1 million a year in profit, pay 20% corporation tax, and then only really start to attack above that. Now the trouble is, when you start attacking the big boys, they can afford the kind of corporate structures that sees them making like people like Starbucks making a loss in the UK, and so paying no corporation tax, because of their international structures and the way they recharge around the globe. Now, they would argue, and I would probably agree with them, that they are generating employment. And so employment taxes, they are selling coffees that we all like to drink and therefore generating VAT revenues. So you have to have a trade-off. You have to encourage business. Maybe capital allowances. I mean, maybe investment allowances.
I think we're going to try and get the country going again. It's going to have to be getting businesses more profitable and trying to take on more staff and grow it that way. So that little leg up on corporation tax would be a big help.
Yeah, and don't forget, they've increased I don't mean to sound like they and us and them, but ultimately we're talking about people who try and create wealth, us, and people who like to spend our wealth, government. Now, they increased national insurance, which they claimed was not a tax on working people, which was their big mantra at the general election in July. And yet, if a company, and we've had dozens of examples through Cube stores, where their national insurance bill is going up by over £100,000 a year.
Yeah.
Now, if you increase the tax take by £100,000 a year, that is going to mean the only way that they can remain at the same level of profitability and still warrant getting out of bed in the morning to create wealth and to sell stuff is by reducing your costs. And the biggest cost in most business is their people costs. I mean, from just a small firm with 20 people like Cubed, probably of our fixed cost, 50% of it is staff.
Yeah, maybe a bit more.
maybe even a bit
Yeah.
more. It's like by the time you paid rents, rates, light, heat, and staff costs, that's probably 95% of most service industry anyway. Businesses costs. So yeah, definitely you need to encourage people to take on more staff. I mean, we have a couple of apprentices which are part sponsored by government, and maybe that would help. Expand the apprenticeship scheme out to more, spheres of expertise or more segments of the economy. But ultimately, people aren't going to start up businesses, if in an environment that is penal to do it. I mean, for the first time in 30 years, the number of companies at Companies House went down in the first 3 months of this year. So company numbers are reducing. Company startups are reducing. And if you don't have any startups, you don't have any medium, large, and, ultimately unicorn businesses to pay tax.
Yeah. Cool.
Perfect. Thank you for that, lads. See you again in a month.
Hey, that's a good question, that last one.
Perfect.
What could we do? What would you do?